Ooh, it's very spicy. It's so blasphemous to even think like that for a Christian.
The suffering servant is a collective noun to mean all of Israel.
Okay.
It's only that one chapter that Christians take the liberty of changing the meaning of the suffering servant to mean the Messiah. I didn't know that all four of the Gospels were written by ghostwriters. I didn't know the history of how the Bible was written, who wrote it, how long it took to be wrote, how many years it took to become canon, how many times Revelation was in and out and in and out. I didn't know any of this until afterwards.
Well, welcome everybody to the Deep Drinks podcast. My name is Dave, and with me tonight, or today, depending on what time zone you're in, we have the lovely Deborah Grace, the author of Crucifying the Bible. And as you can see, this book it may be small, but it is dense. Like, this thing could be used as like a study guide for, I guess, your ideas that you present in this book. I originally got the audio version. Love that so much. I had to buy the physical version because it's just so filled with references that, I'd recommend anyone checking it out. So welcome, Deborah Grace.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, well, I'm super excited to have you on here because you're literally the first author we've ever had on the Deep Drinks podcast. And what are we drinking for the Deep Drinks podcast?
We are drinking Frangelico.
Frangelico?
Yeah, Frangelico.
So I've never had this before. This will be my first time ever tasting it. You suggested it, so I went out and got a bottle, and I was like, okay, whatever the guest suggests, as long as it's possible. So how do I drink it? Oh, you've got one of those glass.
I've got a little whiskey glass. It works in a shot glass. It's hazelnut, a little bit of hazelnut flavor.
I'm a purist. I'll be right back.
Oh, okay.
I got the same glasses.
Oh, nice.
You gotta have it. So you just
you were
drink
gone. I was doing this.
Yep. That's the way. It's a really interesting book, both for anyone who's interested in religion, especially if you're a Christian or an atheist. And what I really like about it is you kind of break it up into two sections. So there's a part, the second part of the book you say is explicitly for people who want to push further into the rational parts of the book. And that's why I thought that was really respectable.
Yeah, I had to, because I knew how hard it was jumping from, okay, now I don't really buy into the whole New Testament thing, but going further and dismissing the Old Testament after doing my research and my study, it was even more jarring. And I knew that even I took a little bit of a breather between the two. I took a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks between the two, before I started researching the Old Testament, and it was jarring, and I didn't want to put that kind of heaviness on somebody else if they weren't ready for it.
Yeah.
So I told people, you may not want to read this section at all, and that's fine. I respect that. But if you do, here you go. But get ready.
Yeah. And it's really, I think that's really responsible, because I think a lot of the time people don't have they aren't so empathetic towards how much religion means to some people. When I was a believer, I literally I was never put in this situation, so I don't know how I actually would have reacted. But if someone held a gun to my head, no doubt in my mind, I would have said, "Yep, I would take the bullet before denouncing Jesus." Like, it was worth more than my life. So for people to investigate that is actually quite hard emotionally.
Yeah. It's almost traumatizing. And in some parts it is, because it really brings to the surface all of the RTS and symptoms that come about. With you finally make that connection. You go, oh my gosh, I've literally been indoctrinated. I have been brainwashed. I have been even abused by this religion. I have been economically abused. If you've been told not to read other things, not to look over here, not to do this, I have been gaslit by the scriptures. I have been the what's the other word I'm thinking of? Projection has been placed on me rather than the original fault. There's so many different aspects. Almost every single, if not every single, type of abuse found in the DSM-5 is checked off in the Bible.
Oh, wow.
And that's forms of abuse. All of those are mental abuse and emotional abuse. They're all there. And that can be really, really heavy for somebody who finds that out as they're exiting religion. So it's really psychologically damaging.
The first person I interviewed on this podcast was a friend of mine that I met in ministry college, and he was a closeted homosexual for 40-something years. And when the same-sex marriage bill came through Australia, he decided to look into the Bible and really study what the Bible said about homosexuality. And he discovered that a lot of the assumptions he was brought up to believe in weren't necessarily true. And then he decided through a long process to eventually come out of the closet and live his authentic self. And it was very hard to kind of see one of my best friends learning to kind of, he didn't have the skill set anymore to deal with like life. Like, so, and I think this is where like a lot of people talk about the prodigal son. Like people, they learn these things on how to deal with the world through Christianity or through their religion. Then they have some things that they question their religion about, or it doesn't really work for everything they want it to be. They kind of leave, and then now they don't have that. They don't have that way to deal with the world anymore, and then they come running back to religion, and then the religious person sees that as like confirmation that their religion is true, and maybe the person as well. And it's like this self-perpetuating thing that religions tend to do. And they can bring a lot of people happiness, but I don't know how true that happiness is sometimes.
But yeah, it's very shallow because the familiarity that people have in their abuse, in their box of being damaged by religion, can be addictive. It's the same with those that are addicted to the cortisol hormone. When you're stressed out and you're worried or you're anxious, people can actually become addicted to those feelings and those hormones that our body releases in that trauma. And so when somebody goes outside of religion and they don't work on healing themselves and doing the shadow work and trying to find resources to mitigate all this abuse, then coming back to it is the familiar, safe place because they know how to cope in that trauma. It's not healthy, but it is. That's why it is so psychologically damaging, and part of why I felt that urgency to write my book once I started it.
Well, this conversation is already super interesting, and I can just see that we can naturally just bounce off each other really, really easily. We seem to think quite similarly. But I did want to actually mention what your book's about. So your book, well, maybe you can describe your book actually better. Essentially, you're maybe you should just explain it better, because essentially you were a Christian and then you studied the word more strongly, and then you converted to Judaism. And then
I converted to Messianic Hebrew Roots Messianic. Is really what it was. Yeah. So the preface really goes into the whole backstory. And I know it's long, and I apologize to the readers for that, but I really wanted to sort of encapsulate my journey in that section of the book, because the book itself is really all about using the scriptures to show why it cannot support itself. First, the New Testament, and then the second section is going into the Old Testament and the whole picture, the view from 50,000 feet. But the first part, the preface, really goes into my journey and how I went at analyzing the scriptures using things like modus tollens and the different fallacies and the biases that are found in the study of critical thinking. And so I really just picked apart each little Christian apologetic, the main arguments that the Christian apologists put forth to non-believers. And then I said, well, okay, that's your argument, but here is actually what the Bible says. So, let's bring context here. Let's show you every side of it, all the facets, and don't just have the myopic biblical glasses on. Let's look at this in the full spectrum that it deserves.
Cool. So it's a super interesting book and something that I never considered when I was a Christian, which was essentially that Jesus doesn't necessarily meet the criteria for the Messiah. And it's
Correct.
a question that it's really interesting because it's like it seems so obvious. Like, well, if Christianity is obviously true, and people say that Christianity is obviously true, the prophets say it, why is there still Judaism? Like, that makes no sense. Like, I never questioned that one question. And so I have this little list here of some things that I picked out of your book that I'd like to kind of read out. And if I've misunderstood anything, let me know, but I'll read it out one at a time. So
Okay.
in the Old Testament, God never said that he will resurrect a Messiah, or that we'll have to believe in a Messiah to be saved, or that we will pray to a Messiah. The Old Testament does not contain a single prophecy of the second coming. The Messiah will usher in worldwide peace, that no one will know war anymore. So that's what the Messiah was supposed to do. And obviously, we have some wars still today. Sin sacrifices were not to be anointed, and yet Jesus was anointed. So that would be going against the laws of the Old Testament. And it is a violation for someone to die on behalf of someone else's sins. That's another law of the Old Testament. There's no heaven or hell in the Old Testament. That's something super interesting. And if anyone is interested in that, I recommend Bart Ehrman's book, Heaven or Hell. It's quite a good book. And finally, a new covenant does not negate an old covenant. So these are some little like points that when I was a Christian, that would have really thrown me for a loop. Like I would have been like very confused by that. And your book goes over in detail those points and many others.
Yeah. I found that it was there were points that I had thought of, and I was really trying to go at, because having been there, I knew the arguments that the Christians bring forth. So I was really trying to think of it, not just critically, but I was really trying to put myself like I was a lawyer in a courtroom asking specific questions that most people wouldn't think to even question. So I was really thinking, all right, so, they say that Jesus fulfilled the law perfectly. Well, okay, let's look at what the law says. And having been in the Messianic Hebrew roots, I knew quite a bit of those laws. So I pulled up, the mitzvahs and went through them. And when I got to the sin sacrifice laws, I'm like, wait a minute. He said he fulfilled the law perfectly, but the crucifixion violates every single sin sacrifice law. How can you be an atonement for sin when your sacrifice, quote unquote, violates the law, which is sin? Sin cannot be an atonement for sin.
How do I imagine that, I'm just guessing here, but I haven't looked into it, but I imagine that they would just, someone who tried to defend that would just do special pleading. Like they would just say, well, it was different for Jesus because he's God. Is that how they generally?
Sure. Sure. However, when you look at the Old Testament, the first 5 books of the Old Testament are said to be Torah, the law. And in that you find several verses that say that it's an abomination. It's a violation of the law for any man to die for anybody else's sin. Okay, and then people are like, but Jesus was God. Well, in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, they call Jesus fully human.
Mm.
These are the writings that are in your Bible that you call infallible, that you call the perfect word of God and inspired. So how do you square that? How do you reconcile these two very obvious dichotomies of a sin sacrifice?
Yeah, and it's at this point that I imagine when you say in your book, the Ad-Hominem Attacks begin. I imagine at that point, when you bring up that's when they start saying, you just want to sin, or you like, why are you doing this, and et cetera, et cetera. Is that essentially what happens? Because that's what happens to me when I ask these same questions or similar.
Very often. Yeah, very often they're like, well, who are you to be judging the word of God? And I'm like, well, prove that it's the word of God.
Yeah.
How can you prove that it's the word of God outside this claim? The Bible is the claim. It cannot simultaneously be the evidence.
Yeah.
So, using scripture to prove scripture is circular reasoning, and you're proof texting your narrative.
Yeah.
So it's I will call them out on the Ad-Hominem attacks, and I'll be like, let's stick to the topics. We don't need to go to Ad Hominem. Let's stick to this topic, this subject, and see if you can square it. And I had somebody who said, yeah, let's debate. Here's my phone number. Call me. And I'm like, I'm not calling you. I have a Discord channel. Let's go over here.
Yeah.
No, you're trying to run away from the debate. Oh, okay. All right. I'll call you from my husband's phone. He can be the MC or the
yeah.
What's the right?
Yeah.
And I called and he never answered. Several
That's
times.
amazing.
Sent a
That's
message.
amazing.
I'm going to call you in 15 minutes. You just said 5 minutes ago, let's do this, and now you're not answering your phone.
Yeah.
So
okay. I recently put out a video on my channel that has to do with science. So it's not necessarily God-based or anything, but I had two people. It was so funny. One person said they would debate me and come on my channel if I recommitted my life to Jesus. And I was like, I didn't have anything to do with God, but I was like, what? Like, okay. And then the other person said he had 5 Twitter followers, and he said that I can't afford his fee. And I said, oh, I'll give you $1 for every Twitter follower you have to come on my show. And he said, how about we start with 25K? And I'm like, 25K? Okay. I was like, all right, this is hilarious. Like you're very
right.
very strong on all your points, but you won't defend them anyway. So I just found it super interesting how people, they challenge the things and they dodge stuff. Now, I need to have a sip of this because I haven't had a sip. And you say this is delicious. So I want to take a sip. And you just have it neat, right? Okay?
Yeah.
And you are correct. This would be delicious over ice cream or something, right?
It actually would, yeah.
Oh, that's so good. How alcoholic is
smooth.
That? Oh, it's not that alcoholic. But it's 12 p.m. It's 12 p.m. here in Australia, but in Australia day drinking is totally acceptable, so.
Right. So well, it's 40 proof. I mean, that's kind of strong.
Yeah, I guess. If I finish
than wine.
Yeah, if I finish the bottle, my wife will come home from shopping, and I don't know, it'll be funny. So I want to talk a little bit about your journey. So a lot of people might, I imagine the first thing they will go to is, what kind of a Christian were you? Like, were you really were you just brought up as a Christian, or were you super Saiyan Christian, like super Christian? And so I wanted to ask you, did you grow up a Christian? Did you have a saved moment or a Pentecostal moment? Were you involved in a Pentecostal church? Cool. So
I remember the day that I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. I was 5 years old, wearing a yellow dress with white polka dots.
Oh, that's adorable.
In Sunday school. Oh. Yeah. And then, I put it in my book and all the different times and why, but baptized 6 times. And there was a reason for, as an infant, because, that's what they do. And then a few other times. The last one was to solidify my conversion to Hebrew roots, because I wanted to do it in the running waters of a river, fresh waters of a river, trying to mimic as close to Jesus' baptism as I could. So yeah, we read the Bible from cover to cover and then start again as children. I would play Bible trivia with my family, and I was homeschooled for 4 years. So that sort of even further solidified my creationism, as that getting away from the science in those early impressionable years. I was taught creationism,
Like young Earth
and
creationism.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes.
Like the Ken Ham, the Kent Hovind kind of deal.
So I don't think I ever. I didn't even know about Ken Hovind until a couple months ago. So I don't
Oh,
think I was exposed to his specific
yeah.
leanings. But we had the curriculum that taught it, and my family. My dad wrote Christian songs, very folk style, and we would go to different churches and sing his songs. And um, we had Pentecostal churches. I was in a Baptist church for a couple years. Just the evangelical, like the New Hope and the Calvary Chapel, and the that's really big in the United States. I don't know if it is there.
Is it like is Calvary like Jesus culture and all that? Like that?
It's more modern, big church.
Like Hillsong kind of?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes, like
Yeah.
Hillsong type of, or Elevation, or
Yeah,
that
okay.
type of church. So went to those types, and then there was a couple of extreme ones. I went to a church called Dunamis. It's a Hebrew word that means power of God, and they were very into hands-on healing and yelling at spirits, and like
Yeah.
right up on your stomach, trying to yell at the sickness or the demons that were in you, trying to like Kenneth Copeland, blow them away,
Yeah. Smith Wigglesworth
with the
style.
breath of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
Or the Benny Hinn style. It was
did you
very.
experience like did you ever like speak in tongues, or did you experience miracles or things like that, or did you see miracles, or what's the craziest, I will say, quote unquote spiritual experience that you experienced in one of these meetings?
Well, trying to be slain in the spirit, trying to
Yeah.
push my head back and get me to they tried that several times, and I just never had that supernatural experience. I never spoke in tongues. I tried to just blabber and sound like, what everybody else was doing, but it wasn't natural. It wasn't organic, and I couldn't get there. My mom swears that she spoke in tongues and did so for many years. As far as I can remember, she would speak in tongues, but she did so very privately. It wasn't something that was, out in your face. So, I lived my life as a Christian. My son's father, when we were married, he was a youth pastor, and so you're exposed to that at two different churches, and I was as involved as you can be, and wanted to. I had that heart. I wanted to help. I wanted to do my part as much as I could, and there were a couple years in my early 20s and a couple years in my 30s, not years, but there was a period of time where I just was a little overwhelmed by life, and I was like, I don't know where God is. And so I turned, and I didn't go out to go sinning or partying or anything like that. I just didn't attend churches, but I still had God in my heart, and I still called myself a Christian, and I still believed, and it was my identity. It was my entire life. And so from the time I would wake up in the morning to the time my head hit the pillow at night, I wanted to be the most godly woman that I could be. And I strived to be more in the word and more in prayer and more in every part of my life. It was surrounded by and influenced by my belief in God. So the people that come at me now that say, well, we're never a true Christian. I'm like, well, now you're lying, and that's against the Ten Commandments. And
Mm,
you can't divine my hearts, and that's a no true Scotsman fallacy.
mm,
So, coming back at that's pretty easy, but it's like, how dare you?
mm,
That's rude. That's inappropriate. You cannot divine my heart or my mind. You've never walked in my shoes. You don't know me. How dare
mm.
you?
Yeah,
It's extremely presumptuous.
yeah. It's so it is interesting though when you can quote, when you can take the moral high ground and kind of point out there being unscriptural. I had a similar, like, you're lying, that's a sin. Like, I had a similar experience where a street preacher stopped me, started preaching to me. I said, hey, look, I'm not interested in having this conversation. I've got some experience, and they wouldn't stop, and they just kept going. So I said, I took my kid gloves off. I took the gloves off, and I said, oh, can I ask you some tough questions? And they said, sure. And I asked them some tough questions, and it got to the point where they just wouldn't answer the questions. And they said, oh, no, that's such a foolish question. And I said, whoa, I said, careful now. You're in danger of the fire of hell if you call me a fool. And then they said, I didn't
Right?
call you a fool. I called your arguments a fool. And I said, yeah, but it's kind of similar. You're getting close. And then it ended with me walking away, giving their flyers back and saying, hey, look, I'm not going to read these, have them. And me walking away and them screaming at me, God's going to harden your heart. And I'm like, well, he must have already done it. And so, yeah, it was just amazing. Yeah.
It's funny that you bring that up because I have it in my book. That specific scripture that talks about, you who call somebody else a fool is in dangers of the fires of hell.
Mm.
A few chapters later, Jesus calls his brothers in fools. You
Yeah.
fools, you vipers.
That's interesting.
I guess Jesus was in danger of the fire of hell.
Jeez. That's crazy. Yeah, I don't remember hearing that in your book when I read it the first time. Wow, I'll have to check that part out. That is really interesting. So eventually though, you mentioned in your book that you had this experience. Was this maybe in the Hebrew Roots Movement or something, where essentially you listened to a preach or something from a rabbi, was it? And it conflicted.
Okay, so you're talking about the video that's
you went to work. Yeah, it kicked you off on your journey.
Yeah. So I made a point of staying in listening to teachings, from Hebrew Roots teachers. I made a point to listen to, this, at least one a day. And when I was at work, I was able to, do my work and listen at the same time. So I was at lunch and I saw somebody ostracizing this series of videos by Scott Shube. And I was like, oh, I've never heard of him. That sounds interesting. And it was from a fellow Hebrew Roots person. And I was like, well, I'm just not going to listen to the gossip. I'm going to go to the source. What did he say? And so I turned on the first video and all color drained from my face, and I stopped it and I was like, I can't go to the next video. I have to take this home to my husband. So I went home and I said, hey, I need you to watch this video. But if you don't see what I see, our marriage is on the line. And he was like, what?
Oh, what? Yeah.
Are you sure you want me to watch this? I was like, absolutely, I do. So he watched the first one. He says, I'm done. I see what you saw. And we both knew the scriptures well enough to understand that he was right. He was scripturally sound in his arguments. And he didn't need to watch. He watched the second one. He didn't watch all seven. He's like, I'm done. I don't need to see anymore. I watched the rest of them. And at that point, we were just like, oh, I guess we're going to go be Jewish then. And just, maybe we should find a synagogue. And I reached out to Tobias Singer. And he emailed me back and said, welcome home. And So we were looking at, well, do we become Karaite Jew? Do we adopt ourselves into, what Ashkenazi tribe? That's kind of where my roots go. And so we were just trying to figure out, well, and he's like, you should probably find depending on how strict you go, if you go Orthodox or if you go Reform, whatever, find a synagogue close to your home. Okay. And we were really looking at and trying to find the material in the synagogues. Meanwhile, I'm like, well, if I'm going to vet the New Testament, I need to make sure that the Old Testament stands on its own. And as hard as that was to bring myself to it, because I was so drawn to the Jewish plight and Israel and had such a heart for that I didn't want to ruin that image that I had. But I lived by the motto that my mom lived by. I'd rather be slapped with the truth than kissed with a lie. And so I went ahead and started vetting the Old Testament and went, oh, crap, it doesn't line up either. So it was about...
was this a long process? Like when you were vetting the Old Testament, was it like a long... It
was about 6 months.
Yeah.
6 months vetting the Old Testament. And then I had to step away for a good 6 months and not even touch anything religious at all. I'm like seriously watching cat videos because it was so overwhelming. Trying to not spiral, trying to not just completely lose it on any given day at any time. I found myself crying on the floor in my living room, just face down crying, going, God, if you are there, if you are real, I need you to reveal yourself to me in whatever way that looks like. I don't care if you're freaking Krishna or Buddha, but freaking please reveal yourself, because I don't know if I can live without a God. So my husband, I told my husband, I said, I need to get away for a week and kind of recenter and reground myself. Went to a mind and body retreat in Florida and just kind of tried to release and process and, regain my composure and equilibrium, and then just live, just figure out how to just one day at a time, one foot in front of another, until I could just be me and start to reinvent myself. Who is Deborah? What is Deborah without the Bible? What is she like? What does she want out of life? And I'm telling you, the religious trauma syndrome that is associated with coming out of that is hard. It's so hard because you've been so conditioned to not read anything about the old Egyptian mythologies or Homer or Virgil or whoever else is out there. You don't know anything about these people or how much of the Bible has hijacked from that. So you don't know the origins. I didn't know that all four of the Gospels were written by ghostwriters. I didn't know the history of how the Bible was written, who wrote it, how long it took to be wrote, how many years it took to become canon, how many times Revelation was in and out and in and out. I didn't know any of this until afterwards. And that is such a disservice to anybody who was following the Bible as their faith, as their foundation. So it took a couple of years before the concept of even writing the book came about. And it came about by accident. Just writing a response to a text message, and I'm like, oh, I think I just started a book.
Yeah. It's like,
okay.
It's just like someone's like, I can imagine someone's like, so why don't you come to church? You're like, well, and then just kind of came out. Is that kind of similar to what happened?
Well, my sister was telling me about a video somebody had sent her. This guy who was trying to parallel the mark of the beast with the vaccines. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
And so I started writing a response, and she knew I was out of religion, but I wanted to put something together cohesively to just kind of explain. And 3 pages later, I'm like, I got a lot to say. And having written for the validity of the Bible for so many years, I pulled out, 10 years of writing, and, tried, pulled it all together and then just said, I'm going to write a book. And my husband said, okay, well, go big or go home.
Yeah.
So
and
I did.
And you definitely have gone big, because mate, I can't. You need to get this book. Look how thin it is. You can read it in a few hours or listen to it. The Audible version is great as well, but it's so packed with juicy Bible goss, I'd say. But it's funny you say about the traumatic experience about kind of looking at the world without those kind of God glasses on. I remember for me, I came to the realization that truth was the most important thing. And I realized that if I was going to look at the evidence and already have a conclusion, that wasn't honest. Like, that was intellectually dishonest. And then I came to the realization that, well, it doesn't matter if it's it doesn't matter if I remove all my biases, because they'll come back to what I already believe, because I already know God's definitely real. I already know Christianity is definitely true. So I don't need to protect that belief. I can just look at the evidence. And I remember even mentally in my mind taking off like my God helmet, like taking off like my Christian helmet and just looking at the evidence and just going, okay, this is what the evidence says, and going, okay, that's interesting. And I saw things that I normally wouldn't see. And then I remember, like, after the investigation, I put it back on. And I remember thinking, like, this is all mentally, I'm not a psychopath, but I'm just thinking like, wow, I saw a crack there. That was interesting. There was a crack there. And the next time I would go into this investigation, I would try and assume nothing. Like, I'd assume that I existed and I could make observations of the world, but I try to assume as little as possible. And the crack was bigger and bigger. And next thing I know, I'm in this giant canyon going, holy crap, this is very deep. And when I would reach out to my Christian friends and say, hey, I found these problems, they would come with the Ad-Hominem Attacks, or they would, they wouldn't be interested in discussing them, or they would say they wouldn't care. And I was like, how can you not care about what's true? And it was for me, one of the hardest things was realizing that people didn't actually care about what was true or not. Like, that was like, I was like, was my faith really this dishonest? Like, and that was for me a really hard thing to kind of realize, that people in the church didn't actually care. And
no.
Yeah. And
no, they don't. As a matter of fact, we had, my husband and I, after questioning 2 separate pastors or teachers in the Hebrew Roots Movement, 2 of the churches we were asked to leave. That's going to happen. When you start questioning their motives or their honesty, or here's what the scripture says, isn't that? And they're like, well, if you're not really learning anything from us, then maybe you should find somewhere else where you will learn.
Yeah.
And another one, it was about the submission. Like, my husband's like, I don't submit to you, I submit to God. And he was like, very offended.
Yeah. And you mentioned in your book that your husband was having lunch with a pastor or a preacher, and then your husband was like, well, I love you as a brother, like, so, and then he said, and the pastor said, show me. And that's crazy. That's crazy, because you guys were having issues around the teachings of tithing and stuff at the time, right?
Yeah, it was that, and there was another issue. There was a couple in the church that wanted to get married, and the pastor there, he said he wanted to do it, but he was only going to do it if they had counseling sessions with him beforehand. And they're like in their 50s, and they're like, "Oh, we know what we're doing. We want to do it.
Yeah.
Why would we have to do that?" And so they asked my husband, would you marry us? So my husband went online, got the certificate, and said, sure. And he married him. And the pastor was offended because Mark had stepped on his toes.
Ooh.
So the lunch was try to smooth things over to say, hey, no harm, no foul. These are adults over here, and you really shouldn't be offended. They're adults. Sorry, but it is what it is. Let's get past this. And the guy, he just wasn't having it.
Oh, wow. So how long would you say that would you consider yourself an agnostic atheist now, or what would you consider yourself in your belief system?
I really try not to put a title. For all intents and purposes, my belief system falls within the atheist category. I try not to use that term because it's so offensive to Christians, and it has such a negative connotation within their circles.
Yeah.
So for most of the time, I just call myself a skeptic. I don't know if there is a God or not. And I tend to lean on the fact that there isn't. I don't know what we're living in. Who created it? Is this a realm? Is it a matrix? Is it millions of years? I don't know. I really don't know. Where did it all come from? Who knows? But it doesn't matter in my day-to-day life. What matters is me being a good person and trying to make this world a better place.
Yeah.
That's what matters.
Yeah.
My relationships with other people, that's what matters. Leaving a legacy, being an example to other people, that's what matters. Does God exist? I don't know. I really don't know, but I'm comfortable in that not knowing. Yeah, and that's me being honest with me.
I was just going to say that seems like, from my experience, is the only honest answer you can actually give. We don't know, but just like how the ancient Greeks didn't know where the thunder was coming from, making up stories about how it's Zeus making that thunder, it may be satisfying emotionally, but it's probably not true. So it's probably best to just say, look, we don't know yet. Like, let's find out. Like, it's an interesting thing, but let's keep the barbecue going, get some drinks, have some friends over. Like, still enjoy your life.
Well, and those you asked earlier about, did I have any supernatural experiences? And I apologize for not getting to that. I do have a couple from my childhood. I had a very, very bad reaction to immunization shot when I was 12, and for 3 weeks, I was in a state like a very severe stroke victim. I couldn't walk, couldn't write, couldn't talk, couldn't feed myself, nothing. And it was 3 weeks later that I woke up and started feeling better. And my mom associated that to God.
Right.
Okay, maybe it was just, I had inflammation in my brain and it came down, the swelling came down. Who knows? They didn't know whether I would ever recover, but I did. And it's to slide God in there is extremely naive, and it's presumptuous. And to do the God of the gaps for everything we don't know is primitive in thought. Science doesn't operate that way. Things that we don't know, you don't call it God. Why should we do that as even as a believer? The God of the gaps fallacy is a fallacy.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because like, if you didn't recover from that super unfortunate experience, then it wouldn't be God's fault. So it's like kind of an unfalsifiable claim, right? So like, when it works, it's God. When it doesn't work, well, it's not God's timing or something. You can't be proven wrong. replace God for magical jug of milk, and you get the exact same results. It's either the jug of milk works or it doesn't. So yeah. Well, I want to actually talk a little bit about your book. And I wanted to mention a few things from the book and just get your thoughts on them, or maybe you could elaborate a little bit further. So a few things that stood out to me was you talk about the sin sacrifice, and I've got a bookmark and I'll just read out a little section of this. The most glaring violation and worldview symbol of the Christian faith is the cross where Jesus is hung, not burned. Not even Abraham was going to hang or crucify Isaac. The Old Testament states, he that is hanged is cursed of God, but Jesus is hung. If Jesus were God, I'm a little dyslexic, sorry. If Jesus were God and if his death was an act of self-sacrifice, then he would be cursing himself. Yeah. And I found that quite interesting. Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit on the sin sacrifice?
Yeah. So every single aspect of the sin sacrifice was a violation. The Old Testament law states that a sin sacrifice must be killed quickly. The blood drained out at the base of the altar. The altar is supposed to be anointed. The sin sacrifice is not to be anointed. It's supposed to be burnt. The leftovers are supposed to be eaten by the priests. The sacrifice is supposed to be handled by consecrated, cleansed, and anointed Levitical priests. And none of it lines up. So a violation of a sin sacrifice law is a sin. So how can a sin be an atonement for sin?
Exactly.
That to me was one of the biggest issues with the entire New Testament, and I just went,
yeah.
The goggles were off. It was done. Nothing else mattered to me, because when you have the sacrifice of Jesus as an atonement for the world fall apart, none of the rest of it makes any sense. He had 4 prophecies about himself that didn't come true. Another sin or violation, or now you're a false prophet. So how do you hang your hat on the Bible as your source of faith when the very main crux, the crest of your story, your main point falls apart? It doesn't line up, and now the rest of it is non sequitur.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think there was even a sect in early Christianity, a very early sect, like within the first couple hundred years, called the Messianites, and they rejected the Old Testament, and they rejected the Old Testament God as an evil deity, that created the world, and Jesus came to save us from this evil deity. So I guess if you just take out all the prophecies about God, and you throw out the whole Old Testament, and you just refer to Jesus as like someone who was like God who crucified himself or something, I guess it could work. But I mean, you're kind of throwing out everything and basing it on nothing, I guess. But yeah, it's...
Well, but at the same time, if you look at, some of the words that Jesus said, he came to save, believe on him and be saved. But those who don't believe, you're dividing the wheat from the tares, and you're dividing the thorns from the good seeds, and whatever else other analogies he uses. If you're coming to save people from a hell that you created, that's extortion. So even if you only use the New Testament, and he's coming back supposedly per the book of Revelation, he's coming back drenched in blood with a sword. How is that benevolent? You're coming to scorched earth.
Yeah.
Coming back to scorched earth, and you're doing it to save.
It puts
What?
God. It put, like, the Bible sometimes makes God out to be like a mafia boss. Like, that's a mighty fine
Oh
soul
yeah.
you've got there. Like, to be ashamed if anything happened to it. Like, and I've got this video on my channel where I talk about how like I don't make fun of God on this channel. Like, I make fun of the ideas people have about God, because you're telling me the creator of the universe sent his favorite tribe of people into another tribe of people to go slaughter everyone, but to take the virgin woman for yourself. Why would the creator of the universe suggest this? I don't understand. Like, it's perplexing to me.
But David, you have to understand. In the New Testament, or let's just go back to the Old Testament. The Old Testament says, "You shall not take a betrothed woman." And then in the New Testament, God did just that. And a bastard shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. So technically, Jesus is a bastard. How is he supposed to get into heaven?
Yeah.
God took a betrothed woman and impregnated her.
Yeah.
I thought you're not supposed to commit adultery. Hello.
Yeah. Ooh, it's very spicy. I can see how a lot of people, and I imagine a lot of this is in the second part of your book, because it's so blasphemous to even think like that for a Christian. So
right.
Well,
I'm a traitor. I'm considered a traitor by Christian standards.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been called worse.
Yeah, well, I think but neither of us were never really true Christians, because what it says in 1 John, they were never really with us if they're now not with us or something. I don't know. I haven't read it for a while.
Right. If you're not for God, you're against God. So.
Yeah, but we have delicious Frangelico.
Right.
Frangelico, sorry. It's obviously taken effect, and I was a little nervous before this, so I had a little bit of whiskey as well.
It's okay.
I did want to mention Isaiah 53, because when I mentioned on Reddit that I was interviewing someone who converted from Christianity to Judaism and then to atheism, is how I worded it anyway. They said, have they read Isaiah 53? And I even had a family member who went to a ministry college years ago, a Bible college or ministry college, I can't remember. And I said, actually, and I said, what are you learning? And they said, I'm learning about, why the Jews don't accept Jesus. And I was like, that's interesting. And I said, why is that? I'm interested to know. And they said, because they don't have Isaiah 53. And I was like, wow. I was like, that's super interesting.
That's actually not true.
Yeah, and then so I went away and looked it up later, and I was like, no, they do. It's right there. Like, what? And I was like, hang on. They do. And I was like, how are you being taught this in like an accredited course? Right. It's just blatantly wrong. Anyway, go on. Tell us about Isaiah 53.
That is a lie that has been perpetuated by the missionaries. And people just believe it because that's what they're taught. That's what they're told. But no, the Hebrew Bible does have Isaiah 53. They know it. They read it. But you have a lot of problems with Isaiah 53. For the first and foremost is most of it, not all of it, most of it is past tense, which last time I checked, a prophecy is not past tense. But there's a lot of problems with it. You have he made his grave. It's verse 9. He made his grave. Oh, let's go back to verse 8. Verse 8 says he was taken, but the Hebrew uses the word lamo, which is them or they. They were taken. So it's a plural used on that verse in the Hebrew.
Just to give some context for maybe people who aren't super familiar, Isaiah 53 is an Old Testament scripture that Christians use to say that Jesus, it's prophesying about the coming Messiah Jesus. Yet the Judaism, they still read this scripture and they don't believe Jesus is fulfilling that scripture. So that's what we're talking about. Yeah.
Right. Verse 9 is backwards because it says that Jesus made his grave with the wicked, but he was actually buried in a rich man's tomb, not a criminal's tomb. And then it says that his death was with the rich. Well, unless these thieves were rich, they were criminals, not rich.
Mm-hmm.
So it's completely backwards. It says that he shall see his seed. The Hebrew word there is zera, which always means physical children. Jesus didn't have any children. It says that he would have prolonged days. I don't think 30 or 33, whatever you subscribe to, is very long life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm already 46. I outlived him.
I know
then
it doesn't
a
mention
lot of
Jesus.
people talk about.
It doesn't mention Jesus by name,
it
does
doesn't.
it?
No, and it doesn't even mention the promised Messiah in these passages.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's a big problem there too. But if there's a lot of people say, well, it talks about the rod and the stripes, the rod and the stripes. Jesus was beaten and he was, what's the word?
Flogged?
Flogged. Yes, thank you. And there are 3 verses outside of Isaiah 53 that talk about, the suffering servant from chapter 1 to chapter 52 and chapter 54 to the end always means Israel, all of Israel. The suffering servant is a collective noun to mean all of Israel.
Okay.
It's only that one chapter that Christians take the liberty of changing the meaning of the suffering servant to mean the Messiah. But if you look at these other 3 chapters or these other 3 verses in the Bible, it explains, again, it's confirmation that it is all of Israel who will receive the rod and the stripes. 2 Samuel 7:14, if Israel is to sin, I will discipline them with rod and stripes. Psalm 89, verses 30 through 32, I will visit my children's sin with a rod and stripes. Children's. And then in Job 9:34, let him take his rod away from me. Job is considered to be part of that collective Israel, even way back then. So if you have this specific, all these problems, you have to take it cumulatively. If you look at it, I mean, even if you take one of those, just one of those verses, you know that the entire verse or the whole chapter or the whole book, it's not referring to Jesus. None of it is pointing to Jesus in that respect. There are some prophecy verses in Isaiah, but I think they're found in like verse or chapter 11, and it's not the same context. You have to look at that in context.
Yeah, it's also interesting too because I've heard someone, I think they called up the Atheist Experience, or maybe it was another talk show, but they said that Jesus is it's all like true because he fulfills the prophecies of the Old Testament. And I think it was Tracy, who I miss dearly from being on that show. She said, did the writers of the New Testament have access to the Old Testament? And the person was like, because it's just like, well, if you were trying to convince someone that Jesus was the Messiah, let's say he was, I mean, there were many apocalyptic preachers roaming around. I mean, John the Baptist was an apocalyptic preacher running around Judea at that time. Let's say if you were wanting to convince that he is the Messiah and you get these beliefs, well, you could easily kind of explain the story to fit the Old Testament scriptures, especially when it's written, the New Testament is written 30 to 60 years after the events that they try to record.
That's ad hoc rationalization right there.
Yeah.
The whole New Testament is that's all it is. I actually mentioned John the Baptist in my my book because one of the prophecies of the Messiah is that Elijah would come before the Messiah.
Yeah,
and so obviously they try to, squeeze John the Baptist as that. And Jesus says, yeah, if you can accept it, here's John the Baptist. He is Elijah. Well, then later, John the Baptist is questioned and he confesses and denies it not. That's verbatim. and says he's not Elijah. So who's lying here? Is it Jesus or is it John the
Yeah.
Baptist? And either way, you don't usher in the kingdom of heaven with lies.
Yeah, I was preaching at a youth camp once when I was training to be the youth pastor. I was a youth leader at the time, and I actually was preaching. I had my Bible, and I was like, "Do you guys know?" I was trying to get them all excited for God. It's like, "Do you guys know that John the Baptist was Elijah?" Or I can't remember exactly what it was. And as I said that,
Mhm.
the youth pastor's wife went, and I went, I looked at her and she goes, "No, that's wrong." And I went, "Oh, okay, forget that." And I just kept going on. And afterwards I was like, "What do you mean? It says it right here." And she's like, "No, I think you're missing the context." And I was like, "What?" And then the other leaders were like, I don't think she's read it. Like, this doesn't make sense because it says it. And anyway, it was just interesting that it's just got,
There are pastors across the nation, across the world right now that still to this day are preaching that, yes, John the Baptist was Elijah.
yeah. You also mentioned in your book that some references in the New Testament that reference the Old Testament don't exist in the Old Testament. Can you explain a little
Oh
bit about
yeah.
that?
Oh yeah. Most the biggest and most glaring of the examples is often used by Christian apologists. I think it's 2 Corinthians 15, 3-4,
Mm-hmm.
or first, I can't remember. And it talks about how, according to the scriptures, Christ died, buried, and resurrected on the third day. According to what scriptures?
Mm.
According to what scriptures? Because that is not mentioned anywhere in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
That's pulled out of thin air. That's completely fabricated.
Yeah. Or we've lost it to
And
time.
on on that alone, the entire Bible should be deemed defunct.
Well, it's at least defunct in that it's not the perfectly put together word of God, because like, couldn't you still say,
Right, not
yeah,
infallible.
yeah, not infallible? Because you could say that, well, maybe there was scriptures, but they were just lost to time, right? Or something, or like they've just been lost. But it just,
I mean, you could, but I mean, or what religious script is that pulling from? Is that pulling from like the books of Greek mythology? I mean, what scriptures? Because a lot of text around the world from different civilizations are deemed, sacred, but it's certainly not coming from the Hebrew Bible.
yeah.
And the Hebrew Bible was very carefully preserved, so.
Yeah, exactly. I do have some more stuff that I want to talk to you about your book, but I think at this stage we might just move on to the Q&A, and maybe if people have questions, we can do another one of these one time or something. If you're up for it, maybe.
Yeah.
But we'll go into the Q&A, and just to keep this relatively short, like not hours and hours. And I've got 9 questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So I was going to pop them up on screen, but obviously we had to have some technical difficulties, and we're using Discord, so I'll just have to read them out. How did your views of Jesus change when you converted to Judaism, or a Judaism of sorts?
Well, at that point, I just saw him as another myth. I saw Jesus as, there might have been some nice things that were written, but I had taken those myopic lenses off, and seeing him through that broad spectrum of critical thinking and being honest with myself, I now saw this Jesus character as a reinvented myth. There are plenty of other saviors in other faiths and religions and myths and legends, and it just didn't make sense to put faith in something that was so badly represented as this demigod. It just didn't make sense, and nothing in the Hebrew Bible pointed to the New Testament Messiah anymore. And so at that point, I was just waiting for the Messiah like the Jews were.
Okay. So your foundation was essentially you really understood the Hebrew scriptures, and because the Hebrew scriptures didn't point to Jesus, all of a sudden that like stack of cards just started to fall, and then Jesus was just another person.
That bridge was burnt. I had dropped the match and lit it and ran.
Yeah. Someone asked, a lot of people were absolutely perplexed. I think when I asked on the Christianity subreddit, they were so confused that someone could even convert from Christianity to Judaism. But they asked, so this question might just be, it's kind of silly, but are you familiar with C.S. Lewis's Lord, Liar, Lunatic question?
No.
Well, I think it's just Jesus is either a Lord, a liar, or a lunatic. I think that's the and to be honest, I'd be doing. I can't retell it exactly how. I wouldn't be giving it justice if I try to explain it because I only just know it as well. So that's your answer. No. We'll move on to the next question. Someone asked, "What is your perspective on the book of Hebrews?"
I think it's probably one of the most offensive books of the New Testament.
Okay.
It's probably yeah. I would have to say that the book of Hebrews is probably the most offensive. It takes so much out. It's one of the most unmatched books of the New Testament. I don't think it matches anything else. The whole tone of it and trying to say that the new covenant replaces the old covenant. It was very badly and poorly explained. Because if you look at the first chapter in Hebrews, it talks about the waxing old of heaven and earth. And then you move to, I think it's Hebrews 8 or 11, I can't remember, that talks about because the Old Testament was erroneous, they had to bring in this new one, and you had to replace the priesthood. And it completely takes out of context the fact that the prophecies were talking about that the new covenant wouldn't be in place until heaven and earth passed away. And then Jesus actually confirmed that, saying, until heaven and earth pass away, every bit of this law is still in effect. And then Hebrews comes along and says, oh, no, that's not what it says. It's not what it means. It's so badly taken out of context. And whoever wrote it did not understand the Hebrew Bible at all or the words of Jesus. And they didn't understand how all of that came together. So, yeah.
Is it traditionally authored by Paul? Like, do people think so? There's like the traditional, like what the church thinks, which is usually a little bit misguided. Is it traditionally thought of as Paul wrote it, but then what does history actually tell us? Is it not written by Paul or?
So some Bible scholars believe that the book of Hebrews was written by Paul, and some of them don't. And so there isn't a real solid consensus on the matter.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually lean toward the book of Hebrew not being written by Paul.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't know. I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know who wrote it. So,
yeah.
And obviously, the scholars would agree. They don't know. They haven't come to a consensus either. So,
cool. This is a big question, and it's more of a question that is probably outside of the scope of Christianity, and it's probably outside of the scope of religion even, is how I'd like you to kind of address it. And that is essentially, the question is essentially, and take your time if you need to think about this, but what evidence would convince you of the existence of a creator?
Seeing or hearing the actual creator.
Oh.
That's really what it would take. I can't take man's word for anything. And having man speak for God or make the claim for God isn't evidence. God would have to present that evidence himself or herself.
Mm.
So that's what it would take.
And I'm sure that if you did end up meeting the creator of the universe in some, like he comes down and they speak to you one day, him, her, it, whatever, that you would immediately believe in the existence of the creator. Whether or not you'd worship it, it would be a different story, but you're not stubborn is what I'm trying to get across. You're after truth.
Well, so it would take, first you'd have to define God. I mean, I'm sure cockroaches may look it up at us and think, oh, these are divine beings. They can squash me at any time. And they don't understand if I try to explain algebra to a cockroach. What is that? So
I mean,
how am I defining?
I'd be the same.
You know?
If you try to explain algebra to me, I'd be like, what are you talking about?
But I'm saying is like, how do I know that this divine being actually created the universe? I would maybe have to see another universe created to know that this was the one that created the one I'm living in. How would I know that this deity or being did create the universe? I could have a very incredible supernatural experience similar to that on being on DMT, but I don't know that this is a work of my own mind playing tricks on me, or there would have to be some very solid evidence for me to know that, yes, this is not magic. This is not a trick. This is not my mind. This is actually a divine being. And what does that mean? So,
yeah, it is a really, you could write books and books on that one question because there's so much that goes into it. This one's a bit of a fun one, and I wrote this one. If there was one true religion, which religion would you hope that to be?
I have not come across a specific religion where I'm like, oh, I hope that's true.
Yeah.
So I can't really say that, oh, I wish this one was true yet.
I'll ask you this or that. Would you rather reincarnation be real or an afterlife be real?
Oof. Both of those are good.
I mean, these are kind of getting into the realm of like stoner questions. So I apologize for that. But
no, that's okay. It's okay. The only way in which I would want reincarnation to be real is if I got to keep these memories.
Yeah. Cool.
Other than that, I'd probably pick Afterlife.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe that there is a hell, and even if there were, it's pretty sadistic to say, oh, I'm going to give you a whole new body so you can actually feel the torment of hell.
Yeah,
because as it stands, you would kind of need nerve endings in a body for you to be tormented. Yeah, so if it's just a soul, quote unquote, going to hell, where's the torment?
Yeah, exactly. And it's also like the torment that you feel in a physical body is those cells like dying and degrading. Like what is it? Are you renewed constantly in hell? Like renewed and then die? Like,
well, you're apparently immortal.
Yeah.
You know, apparently you're just immortal burning. Like,
yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you everlasting life if you believe in me. Okay, but you're going to give everlasting life to the person in hell too. So, okay.
Yeah, exactly. What did you find is the most common misconceptions Christians have about the Old Testament when you left Christianity to Judaism?
Probably the misconception, the strongest one I believe, is probably that that the Israelites in the wilderness were only the tribes of Israel. Very few Christians understand that there was a mixed multitude in the wilderness, and people who were Egyptian or from other surrounding areas adopted themselves into Israel. And so when the Old Testament also says those who were not of the tribes were supposed to be treated by the Israelites as native born. Don't treat them any different. And yet, when you look at Christianity and the New Testament, the idea is that the Gentiles who become believers are still Gentiles. And that concept is somehow lost from the Old Testament in the New Testament writings. And I had never met a pastor from any denomination who ever touched on this. They talked about, you're grafted in, but they don't mention the fact that you're grafting into the tribes of Israel. And all of these laws in the Old Testament, the eternal covenant, what has specific laws and feasts that say, for all generations in all your dwellings, perpetually, forever, follow this. So in the New Testament misses that in their belief and in their traditions and understanding of the Bible in full context. They miss that completely. You are now part of Israel. You're no longer a Gentile. A Gentile just means non-believer. You're no longer goy of other nations. You are part and parcel of the tribes. And per the Old Testament law, you're not supposed to be treated any different than a Jew. So that's totally missed. That was one of the strongest misconceptions. It puts a whole new light on the Bible, which I still think it has value in academia, but that's about it.
Yeah. Okay. So 3 last questions. Now, the first 2 I'm going to ask you are kind of partners. So the first question is, what is the most compelling argument for the existence of God? And then my next question will be, what's the most compelling argument against the existence of God? In your mind, like if you were to give the best, obviously you're not convinced of it, but if you were to give the best argument that you think points towards God, that obviously doesn't make it all the way for you, but what would you say that is?
Probably it's an appeal to nature. It's the symbiotic nature of our existence here on the planet. The cycles, the symbiotic nature of just the life on the plains of Africa, how it all needs each other, how it all feeds off of each other, and the cycle of life that happens between the redwood forests to the kelp in the ocean to our winters and the balance that exists in nature. That to me is probably the strongest argument. The weakest argument is I feel it. The anecdotal, I feel it, you just need to accept and feel it and believe. That's the weakest one for me.
Well, what is the most compelling argument like against the existence of God? So not just the weakest to propose God, but let's say
again.
Yeah, let's say well, how could there be a God if X or something? So like I think of like the problem of evil. I think of things like the age of the Earth being older than 6,000 years, like the scientific consensus of the Big Bang Theory or something. Like what would you say is the strongest argument against the existence of God? Or it could be Bible stuff or...
The strongest argument against the existence of God is probably the biblical God, because that's all I could speak to is the biblical God.
Yeah.
Is probably the moral argument.
Which is so funny because people say the opposite. People say that that's the reason. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. No, there isn't. I mean, I read through Genesis and completely stripped it and just took off all the fluff and just wrote what God said or did. He said this, he did this, he said this, he did this. Took apart everything else, and you're left with a horrible deity, absolutely malevolent.
Yeah. I have to read this section. I marked it, and I marked the ones in yellow for ones I might want to bring up, but I have to read this in what you just said. Returning briefly to the topic of Satan, it should disturb anyone who believes in the Bible to find out how many recorded, verified deaths can be attributed to God and how many can be attributed to Satan. Satan, 10. God, 2,821,364.
Yeah.
And what I find is also interesting is I asked this to a Christian online, is if we have references in the Bible of God lying or God sending a deceptive spirit, and we know that it also says that Satan lies, how do we know who's telling the truth, or like when God is telling the truth? And this, then the Ad-Hominem Attacks started. Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, because that's why you ask such a foolish question.
It should be noted, though, that those 10 were approved by God, so they could actually go into God's account.
Yeah, I know. They're only.
But David. But David, Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy.
Yeah, exactly.
What exactly did Satan kill or steal or destroy? What?
I know.
What?
I know. Yeah.
Because you know what? God actually created Satan. He created the serpent, who was cunning.
Yeah.
He created the tree and planted it right in the middle. He did it all. So to gaslight and say it's our fault, we're wretched, is abuse.
Yeah.
Pure and simple.
I think that I really want to look. Have you ever read the book Lost Christianities by Bart Ehrman?
No, I haven't read that one yet. I have a long list of books I want to read and getting to them.
I bet. Lost Christianities, he has a talk on it as well on YouTube, like a bunch of talks. And it's so interesting because he mentions that there's the Marcionites, which I mentioned before, and then there's the Ebionites and Gnostics and stuff, and how proto-Orthodox Christianity kind of took off. But what's so interesting about it is the Marcion of Sinope, I think he's called, he rejected all the Old Testament, and he had this book called, that I think this is all back somewhere in my brain that I don't really remember, but he had this book called The Antitheses, and we only know about it because we know about people who were referencing it like in order to rebut it. So we don't actually have the original. It'd be so interesting to find the original. But essentially he was saying, how can you say that the God of the New Testament is the same as the God of the Old Testament? Because, are you saying the person that said, let the little children come to me, also said, go and kill the Midianites or or I forgot which group it was, or go kill the little children? Or, are you saying that the same God that says, turn the other cheek, also said, I'm jealous and I'm going to flood the entire world? Like, how can you say these are the two same gods? And I was like, wow, this Marcion of Sinope, he was like a kind of a badass for 200 CE or whenever he was kicking around. And I really wish I could read his original texts. Like if we could find them somewhere one day, or maybe Satan has a book that we don't know about that we could dig up. We imagine that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's, the God of the New Testament is just as bad. I mean, you have verses in Luke that say, we are good for nothing slaves. And we're supposed to be happy about it. And then you have Jesus, who's calling the Gentile woman and her daughter dogs. You have the book of Revelation, where he's just pouring out bowls of wrath left and right, scorched earth. It's just a nightmare mess, coming back drenched in blood with a sword. And of course, it's the same one. Of course.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. I don't know what to say to it all except for yep. It's just it's a big, very big topic. So the last question and to end this interview, and I think you can take a bit of time for this one if you want, but what advice would you give to someone who is questioning their faith? Or maybe it's in the same sort you were, when you were first having those doubts.
It takes courage to question your faith, and it's not an easy road initially, but it does get better. there is a huge community of former believers who will absolutely embrace you with open arms. And I've spoken to people. I've answered phone calls. I've reached out to a couple people and said, hey, if you need to talk, I'm here. Let's have a conversation. I've done that numerous times. But if you are willing to be honest with yourself and actually question your faith, you're a badass. And take comfort in that. It is not an easy road. It's not an easy journey, but it is a badass road to be on. And on the other side, life goes on. We make it. Some people will shun you. Some people will call you names. It's not the end of the world. I promise.
Yeah.
It's my advice.
Yeah, if I was to say something similar, for me, leaving faith was one of the hardest, emotionally wrenching, but also exciting experiences I've ever had in my, like, it was just so.
Oh, I have so much more peace now.
Yeah.
I have so much more peace now.
The world makes
riddled
sense.
with fear. I was riddled with fear in my faith, in my religion, and that's horrible. To be in a place of fear. Am I going to make it? Because, according to this scripture, he chooses you. Well, what if he doesn't choose me? And according to this one, it's your faith. If you have faith of a mustard seed, that's it. You're in. This one, if you're only going to be in there if you're baptized. And it's like, did I do it right? There's so much fear in religion, and there's so much peace on this side.
Yeah. I remember used to feeling really concerned seeing my friends get drunk or whatever, or sin or something, because we were quite strict in our faith, and I'll be worried, they're going to hell or whatever. And I remember, when they would drink obsessively or they would go crazy because that's what they expected to do. But as I got older and as I kind of sat with our faith and stuff, my wife and I, that guilt about drinking and stuff kind of went away, and we realized, you know what, like, it's actually fine to have some drinks and enjoy the night and stuff. And if you don't want to be sick, then you don't have to drink too much, and you can have a couple of drinks and you can, spend some time with your friends and your loved ones. You can have deep conversations and you can, go to bed, wake up with a hangover, order a pizza. It's totally acceptable and fine. If you don't want to be hungover, don't drink too much. If you, just things started to make sense. Like if I was nervous about, going for a drive into the city because I had anxiety or something, I used to pray about it. And that would make me feel better. It's like, but I realized, well, hang on, I don't need to swerve into traffic. If I don't feel safe, I can just continue on the same road that I'm on. And just building rational ways to deal with the world. It was a hard process to kind of shake the faith and the appealing to belief and stuff. But once I did, and once my wife did, the world became so much easier to deal with and also exciting. We live with someone who works at Australia Zoo with Steve Irwin, before he died, his zoo. And she works with Robert Irwin, his son, and stuff and stuff. And we went in there with her, and it was awesome because we went up to the fossil cabinet and I bought fossils, and they're I think it's 60 million years old. And it's I just bought it for $20. And I was I don't have to rationalize why these numbers are fake and why the Irwins are lying to me about stuff. I was just this is really cool. The universe just kind of makes sense. So although it's heart wrenching and you can have issues with your family, and some of our family don't even know where we're at still, it's super rewarding is what I'd say, and exciting.
If I may, when I started to expand my repertoire of literature, I came across a scripture in the Apocrypha, in the book of in the book of Ecclesiasticus. I ended up buying the 1611 King James Bible, which has it. But
I got it right there. The 20-year edition. Yeah, amazing, right? Yeah.
It's beautiful. It was my favorite book to read from,
Yeah.
or my favorite Bible to read from. But there's a verse in Ecclesiasticus that says that wine was made to make men merry, and then Jesus' first miracle was turning water into wine. So
Amen.
yeah, having a drink
Amen.
or two
Yeah.
is not a problem,
Yeah.
even scripturally.
Yeah. It's
I don't know where those doctrines came from.
I know.
You can't drink.
Yeah. Well, thank you so
What?
much. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Deborah. Everyone, make sure you check out the book.
Thank you.
I would recommend, if you're kind of interested, I'd recommend just at least getting the Audible version because it's only like 4.5 hours long. The narrator is awesome, and
Yeah,
then
she's great.
and then get the physical version if you love it. I got the Audible version, and I was kind of like, yeah, this will be interesting, like whatever. And then when I was about halfway through, I think I messaged you, and I was like, I messaged you just randomly on your Facebook page. And I was like, this is amazing. And I was like, this is so good. And then like only hours after that, I was like, can you please come on my show? And then you're like, yeah, sure. And the next thing I know, I'm ordering the physical version. And like, I didn't even put all the stickers in. I just put in the ones that were super relevant from what I bookmarked in Audible. So I recommend anyone getting the book, checking it out. It's really interesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for coming on to the Deep Drinks podcast. Thank you for introducing me to Frangelico. And am I saying it right? Gee, Frangelico.
Yeah, Frangelico.
Cool. And hopefully we can do this again sometime. So,
I'd love it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.